Hi, I'm Millie Mattis, and I'm doing my first duty as a worship associate today, so be kind. Our topic today is why we gather. That feels like too big a subject or a concept for me to address as a layperson. So I have reflected on why I feel the need to gather. First, a little background. After moving to the Portland area in the fall of 2018, I proceeded to go about the process of finding a new church, making friends and contacts in my neighborhood, but had barely gotten started when the pandemic hit. Even when I joined the membership of UUCWF, it was over Zoom. Now, my fellow choir members may not realize that I'm a closet introvert. I hear the laughter, except when I'm performing musically or clowning around about it. Consequently, I first viewed the enforced isolation of COVID precautions as a welcome invitation to a quiet life of contemplation that would not otherwise be available in our hyper-connected modern world. Here was a chance to experience living the life of a hermit without having to publish a dramatic meditation manifesto and answer any challenging questions about my change of lifestyle. However, as the pandemic ground on and on and on and on and on, even I was getting anxious about the slow process of making meaningful new contacts. It seemed to me that the experience of being in a close family structure when we are being raised means that most of us have become accustomed to having a group or posse of friends and other friendly types in our immediate vicinity. And we grow uncomfortable if or when that close relationship falls apart. And as our extended family environments have fallen apart in modern times, that has made it even more important to find a new family somewhere. My efforts to find a family started when I was 3 years old. My mother died rather suddenly, and as my dad worked the midnight shift at the Dodge Auto Plant in Detroit, Michigan, a mad scramble ensued to find my brother and myself places to live while things were sorted out. I must have been a rather difficult child, as it took most of that year and several worn-out uncles, aunts, and grandparents before a great aunt and uncle finally took me in. There followed 3 years of a rather disjointed family life before my father remarried, the Wicked Witch of the North, in my view. Things never did work smoothly, and at the age of 18, I left and embarked on a series of disastrous decisions that took a while to figure out. As I'm still standing, we can see it finally seemed to work out, but I have often felt like something was missing, some basic level of comfort and connection, to the point of feeling a hunger for it. We all know that our society is too often divided into factions or opposites, which can make coming together more difficult. Young, old, rich, poor, makers, takers, urban, rural, black, white, gay, straight, able, disabled, labor management, native, immigrant, kids, no kids, dove, hawk, married, single, homeowner, renter. The categories are endless and all divisive. It has become almost impossible to indulge in the antiquated activity of the art of conversation or agreeing to disagree after discussion and debate of these important issues. In my personal search for happiness, I have found the most comfort from looking at the world as one. Sounds corny, but I'm happiest when I can see others fitting together with me as part of the whole enchilada, rather than clinging to one side of an issue or another. We all contain parts of these categories inside of us, and we can choose which ones to honor or emphasize at any particular time. Part of the reason I want to gather with others is to explore our differences in a safe, accommodating space. And I find coming together at church offers one of the best ways to meet others and share our agreeing or opposing viewpoints, not with a view to changing each other, but of appreciating what each of us can bring to the conversation. Here, as we work together on projects like landscaping, the Hope Food Pantry, Feed the Hungry dinners, religious education, worship service, building maintenance, we can explore our differences in a safe, welcoming, affirming space and grow into that understanding and acceptance of each other that epitomizes the best of family life here in our chosen church family.
1 year ago, this past week, I preached my first sermon here at Willamette Falls. We were still only offering services online. I sat right down here in a chair with a camera and talked just to the camera. There were only a couple of other people here. Since I hadn't met many of you yet, it kind of felt like walking a tightrope without a net. Now, I was a teacher for a lot of years, and I have emceed film festivals and other events. I know how to stand up in front of a room of people and engage with them. What I did not know how to do was engage without being able to look into your eyes or hear you laugh or hear your silence. I needed to feel the energy in the room, and I longed to be in relationship with you. Those things, they matter. Our embodied presence matters. It matters not just for the people on the worship team, but for all of us. Our relationships in this community matter. It's what makes us a church. Mind you, I don't mean to suggest that you can't forge real relationships over Zoom. You absolutely can. I have learned. We have all learned. But those relationships need to be forged bit by bit in smaller breakout rooms. They need to be approached with intentionality about that takes into account the form that we're using. In other words, being in relationship over Zoom is really no different than being in relationship here in person, because we need to approach building relationships with intentionality, and it happens in smaller groups, in gatherings, in participation in the life of the church, not just in showing up on Sunday morning. When I noticed that 1 year anniversary, and I thought about how different today was going to be, being here with all of you, well, it felt pretty great. It feels as if there are more people here every week, and this fall, we've been able to reintroduce coffee hour and second Sunday, second hour, sorry. And many of you have already signed up for fellowship dinners or circles, which we're gonna be rolling out soon and get you information about. Coming up on November 6th, we have the Involvement Fair. Things are really picking up. Since we find ourselves in a moment of rebuilding, reimagining, reconnecting, rebinding our community. I think it's worth asking ourselves, why do we gather? In the reading earlier from Priya Parker, she talked about drilling down until you hit upon a belief or a value. She used the example of a neighborhood potluck. At the General Assembly of the UUA in 2016, Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd gave a real barn burner of a sermon about the importance of relationship in congregations. It's available on the UUA website. I highly recommend it. In it, Reverend Ladd quoted the anti-racist activist and organizer Mickey Scott Bay Jones, who says that relationship is the sandpaper that wears away our resistance to change. Relationship is the abrasion that agitates enough to make a way forward. Relationship, consistent and ongoing encounter with people and perspectives different from our own. It smooths the way for the sacred, even as it rubs us raw. Reverend Ladd's point was that the way we relate to each other here in this church is a model for how we will relate to each other, to other communities, to the wider community. She went on to say, and I'm quoting Reverend Ladd now, "There is a holy abrasion of the spirit born in deep relational encounters across differences. We, as congregations and as a movement, exist to be instruments of that holy abrasion. Those very encounters are our work. And yet we know that there are so many ways to hide from the discomfort inherent in a holy abrasion. There are plenty of opportunities presented each and every day in the life of a congregation to back away from the hard work of continually and repeatedly relating meaningfully to one another and to the world." So if Priya Parker, who talked about drilling down to the real purpose behind our gathering, were to ask Reverend Ladd what the purposes of UU gatherings should be, Reverend Ladd might say that it is to learn how to be in loving, compassionate relationship with people who differ from us, who disagree with us. She would say that practicing that here in church allows us to practice that in the greater world, building justice, especially in this time of intense polarization, right? I have noticed that this congregation is remarkably harmonious. I know that from comparing you all to other congregations I've been a part of over the years. And in my seminary classes, I have many opportunities to compare notes with my classmates who are also in internships. And let me tell you, I have often felt very lucky during those conversations. Lucky to have Reverend Marcia as a mentor, and lucky to have this church's board to work with and learn from, and lucky to have all of you. But it has sometimes made me wonder if there are some difficult conversations that are being avoided. And if, now that we're coming out of our COVID cocoons, we might each find some sandpaper people in our lives here. Granted, one person's sandpaper might be another person's silk. But one thing about social distancing is that it has been easier for a while to avoid the holy abrasion of community. Priya Parker asks, what are the beliefs, values, or principles that call us to gather? Our UU principles do not call on us to politely sidestep conflict or to dismiss self-centered, I'm sorry, I'm gonna start that sentence again, here it comes. They do not call upon us to politely sidestep conflict or to dismiss self-centered behavior as just quirkiness. They do call on us to approach conflict with respect and compassion, and to accept that we are not all on the same spiritual path, much less in the same spot on any given path. We come here for the fellowship of others who are seeking to live a life rooted in love and justice. But that shouldn't mean just finding a group of friends at church and forming a closed circle. A church is really a collection of circles, a community of communities, as Paula Cole-Jones puts it. She's a former president of Drum, as well as formerly on the congregational life staff at the UUA. As Paula Cole-Jones describes it, a sense of belonging in a church comes from the connection to the smaller groups within the church, belonging to the choir, to the forum, to a chalice circle, or being on the worship team or the RE community. Participation in these additional smaller circles transforms the experience of this church from something that you consume to something that we co-create together. Something that we co-create together. Do you think of yourself as a co-creator of this church? As a stakeholder? Or as a consumer? Why do you gather? As you know, I have moved often. And one of the first things I do when I move is I look into joining a chalice circle or one of the women's circles at a local church. And after a move not too long ago, I looked to do so at, well, a large congregation not too far from here, let's say. They didn't have any chalice circles at that time, but they did have 4 women's circles. 2 of them weren't accepting new members at all at that time. Both of those groups that weren't accepting members already had around 20 members each, so that makes sense. But the 2 groups that were accepting new members both had over 20 members. The 3rd and 4th ones, most of the members in those groups had been in the same women's groups for years and years, and they knew each other really well. I joined one of the groups. Even if not everybody shows up, there were a good 18 folks showing up on a regular basis. 18 people getting together in 90 minutes. I feel like the conversation could have gone deeper, that not everybody got a chance to talk. And the thing was, they were big enough to break into smaller groups that would allow them to have more meaningful conversations, that would allow them to have more room to allow new members in. I know that the women in those groups had formed bonds of friendship over many years, and that they didn't want to give any one of them up. I understand that. But that circle didn't feel particularly welcoming to me. Those circles felt kind of closed, even the ones that were technically open. Imagine if those circles split into smaller ones once they reached a certain size, and imagine if they rotated membership periodically. After the dozen or so years that all of those folks, there were about 100 women involved in women's circles there, siloed into 4 groups. If they had had rotation in smaller groups, all 100 of those women, after a dozen years or however many, would feel like they knew each other pretty well, right? There would be a wide network of interconnected people who felt like they had a deep knowledge of one another. I wonder how often they ask themselves why they gather and drill down deep enough to get to a value or a belief. If your purpose for gathering is to find a group of friends to hang out with, then once you have accomplished that, where is the incentive to make room for new people? If your purpose for gathering is personal spiritual practice or the enjoyment of a particular activity, then the choice whether or not to show up on any given week might be personal too, regardless of who else is there. What if your purpose in gathering is to participate in the co-creation of your faith community? Some groups have this naturally built in. If you sign up for the choir, you know that you're committing to rehearsals and to showing up on Sunday morning, and the contribution that you make, the service that you are offering this community is visible and treasured. Thank you. But what if you treated belonging to a cellist circle or a fellowship dinner as that kind of service? What if you saw that as your opportunity to serve your church? What if you gather in order to participate in the holy abrasion of community? What if you do this so that you're better at loving, better at healthy conflict resolution, better at living your principles? What if your purpose were to participate in strengthening the web of support and understanding that flows through this body of people, ensuring that no one falls through the cracks, so that ultimately you can do the same out in the greater community? As we begin to offer more activities and opportunities here at Willamette Falls, I invite you to ask yourselves, why do you gather? And ask each other. Have that conversation. You might be surprised by what you have to say to one another. I pray that it be so. Amen.